Explain the African diaspora to me. Break
Uh,
it down.
the African diaspora is the dispersion of Africans globally, period. Um, and the diaspora can be, whatever timeline you want to frame it as. You know, it can be 500 years ago, starting with Columbus. It can be 1,000 years ago, starting, with Africans coming to the Americas. Matter of fact, it could be 3,000 years ago with Africans coming to Americas. It can be 40,000 years ago when Africans leaving Africa going to Australia. You know, it can be 4,000 years ago with Africans leaving Africa going to, going to Europe. Because the first Europeans were African. Matter of fact, even going further back, 40,000 years ago when the first Europeans were black African. You know, so the African diaspora again just means the dispersion of Africans globally, and you can take that any way you want.
With the exception of slavery, okay, that I know of, were we dispersed places because we just traveled there without being forced to go there? So are there some Africans that just traveled to certain places?
Of course.
Or was it all created via slavery?
No, 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 no. Understand that 1619 is the first indentured servants who came to these shores, right? Through through Britain, right? Because remember, Spaniards and Portuguese came here before, and there are Africans there. Matter of fact, you have many Africans who blended with Native Americans before then as well, and after then during that time, because it's like the waves of the diaspora are many in the ocean of African exploration. You're from Chicago. Who founded Chicago? John Baptiste de Pont de Sable, a black fur trapper who was also Native American. That was in the 1700s. So again, you see a black man who's Native American who wasn't a slave. At least when he founded Chicago. So you don't have enslaved Africans going around just discovering things. So you have that, and if you look at the history of Europe, right, and the fables of the Odyssey and the myths of of Odysseus and stuff like that, you have African women who were instrumental in those tales. You have Circe, who helped Jason and the Argonauts, find the Golden Fleece, and she ended up marrying him. So now you have African women who are noted as being historical figures or personages in European history. If you look at 40,000 years ago, you have the Venus figurines, right? Venus, what do you call it? The Venus, they're Venus figurines. 40,000 years ago, basically, they come from Europe, and they show women, African women, they have peppercorn hair, really augmented breasts and hips, because during that time, the feminine personage was representative of God, right? The first concept of God was feminine, right? Later on, it became masculine. So and that came from the fact that when you look at nature, and you understand that before, just like now we understand, or we think we understand the connection between sugar and obesity or diabetes, primal man or primal humans that understand that the connection between copulation and reproduction, right? So what happens is women were just thought to just get pregnant, right? Immaculate conception, right? So when you saw this, this woman who got pregnant, after 9 months, she'd have, the baby, and she would also nurture the baby. So her breasts were nurturing, when she carried the baby in her belly, nurtured the baby there, So trees were seen as nurturing because they could provide a shelter, like the woman provides shelter, and they also provided fruit. The woman, provided fruit, like she gave of herself, her body, to feed the children, to feed the population. That's where you have not only the Immaculate Conception coming from, but you have the sacrifice of Jesus coming from, right? When you drink the blood of Christ and eat the bones of Christ, right? That basically goes back to the Osirian myth or Osiris myth, who was also an ancient African deity, and he was the god of wine and grain. So whenever you're drinking wine, you're drinking you're drinking to respect and deify Osiris. Same when you're eating bread. But also Dionysus was the Greek version of Osiris. Because again, god of wine, and bread. So but again, that comes from an African female model, right? So when you're eating off that, so again, when the woman would, give of herself, the woman would feed the child. And it got to a point to where when she was no longer able to bear children, she would give herself to the clan in order for, them to survive, and, because she couldn't, that was her sacrifice.
And they would cannibalize her.
Correct.
Wow. And this all comes from African culture.
It's it's like this is, now that those practices are, 100,000 years old or so. That was, again, before we understood the connection between copulation and procreation, right? Okay. And that's where totemism came from. Like totemism, as far as, you being associated with a certain animal and a certain clan that identified your family, right? We have it now if you're a Chicago Cub, Boston Red Sox, St. Louis Cardinal, Chicago Bear, right? Totemism, again, is African practice. You also see it in Native Americans. That's when you think about the totem pole, think of Native Americans. But again, you have a spirit animal or something, something that's natural, representative of your family, your clan, and it also separated you in order to distinguish you from somebody else.